Detroit, November 2025. Snow drifted through pre-dawn darkness like ash from a fire.
Thank you. This upgrade will boost our output by 15%.
James Carter's alarm dragged him from dreams of Rebecca.
What is that thing doing on the table?
Almost got it. Just a loose wire. This is highly irregular. Put it out!
Unbelievable.
His hand found the clock and killed it. 5:30 a.m. Same as every morning for 3 years. He lay still for 30 seconds staring at ceiling tiles the color of old teeth. 400 square feet, $800 a month. Every surface in this place told the same story. You used to be someone, now you're this. The kitchenette had 2 working burners. The bathroom shower coughed rust-colored water for the first 30 seconds. On the shelf above the sink, Rebecca smiled at him from their wedding photo, 28 years frozen in a silver frame. She'd worn her grandmother's dress altered 3 times because they couldn't afford new. He'd rented a tuxedo that didn't fit his shoulders. "Promise me you'll find your way back." She'd whispered it in the hospice hand, thin as paper, voice reduced to breath. He'd carried that promise for 3 years, like a stone in his chest. James sat up slowly, 55-year-old knees protesting, vertebrae crackling like distant gunfire. The laptop on the card table showed his bank balance in blue numbers that might as well have been a countdown clock, $347.82. He made instant coffee in the microwave, watching the chipped mug spin behind scratched glass. The cup had once said, "World's Best Mechanic," before the dishwasher wore the letters away. Now it just said, "W and blank and blank and NIC," a description that felt increasingly accurate. His phone vibrated against the Formica counter. The screen lit up with words that made his chest tighten. "Dad, can you help this week? Tuition's due and I'm short." Emma, 27 years old, working night shifts at Pittsburgh General while finishing her nursing degree. Rebecca's determination wrapped in his stubbornness. She tried so hard not to ask for help, which meant, when she did, she really needed it. James looked at the laptop screen again, did the math that had become second nature. Rent due in 12 days. Bus pass renewal next week. Electric bill sitting on the counter with the red past due stamp. He transferred $200 before he could reconsider. Balance $147.82. The checking account notification glowed on his phone for 3 seconds, then disappeared just like everything else he'd once had. He poured the scalding coffee, burning his tongue on the first sip, because he never learned to wait. In the corner, barely visible in the dim light, sat the red metal toolbox that had belonged to his father. David Carter had carried that box to Ford every day for 35 years. James didn't open it anymore. Couldn't. Every tool inside was a memory of Sunday afternoons in the garage, learning to listen to engines that spoke in frequencies most people never heard. An engine has a heart, son. You listen with your ears, your mind, and your soul. David had died in 1994 or so, James had believed, for 31 years. Heart attack, instant, painless. That's what everyone told him when they called him home from community college, 24 years old, and certain the world had ended. He wouldn't learn until much later that this was only partially true. Across town, Catherine Drake stood in her penthouse watching Detroit wake up beneath her. The city sprawled in sodium vapor orange and LED white, a circuit board of ambition and failure. 50 floors up, insulated by glass and money, she could almost forget she'd come from down there. The apartment was minimalist perfection, chrome and black leather, every surface chosen by an interior designer whose fee could have fed a family for 6 months. On the kitchen island, a Slayer espresso machine. $8,000 of Seattle engineering hissed steam through $30 specialty beans. Catherine reviewed quarterly reports on her tablet, red pen marks bleeding across projected revenue. Her hand trembled slightly as she highlighted another paragraph, then stilled, forcing discipline into rebellious muscles. Weakness was permission for the world to take everything. Her father had been weak once for one fatal moment, and it killed him. She would not repeat his mistake. The reports glowed with their own kind of dread. Atlas PM 7500 Marine Engine Project, 47 consecutive failures, Thermal shutdown at 11 minutes 47 seconds in every test cycle. Bobby Sullivan threatening withdrawal of $60 million in investment. 47 tests. 8 weeks. Millions of dollars. Every engineer on staff had taken their shot at the problem. Derek Mitchell with his Harvard MBA, Ashley Parker fresh from MIT, the entire team throwing credentials at a machine that didn't care about pedigree, and still failure at exactly 11 minutes and 47 seconds, every single time. Ma'am, breakfast is ready. Marcus emerged from the kitchen alcove, 68 years old, retired Marine with 20 years of service etched into his bearing. Slight Kentucky drawl, softened by decades in Detroit. He'd worked for Catherine 15 years, long enough to know she'd skip every meal if he didn't bring them anyway. He set a tray beside her elbow. Poached eggs, whole grain toast, fresh fruit arranged like still life. Hands clasped behind his back waiting. Catherine circled another failure report in red. "I'm not hungry. You haven't eaten since yesterday morning, ma'am. I'm occupied." Marcus retreated with the tray concern etched in the lines around his eyes. He'd served in Vietnam, seen men break under pressure, recognized the signs in Catherine's rigid shoulders, the way her hand shook before she forced it still. Catherine's phone buzzed. Caller ID Bob Sullivan. She stared at the name. $60 million. 2% of his net worth, but he treated every dollar like it was his last. Texas oil money built on Nevada. Rare earth minerals. A man who'd started with nothing and remembered what nothing felt like. The phone stopped buzzing, then immediately started again. If she didn't answer, he'd pull funding now. If she answered without a solution, same result. The board meeting was Wednesday, 3 days away. She needed an answer before then. Catherine's reflection stared back from the window. Platinum hair, sharp features, 52 years of control that was one phone call away from shattering. She answered. "Bob." His Texas drawl came through warm but weighted. "Catherine, if test 48 fails, my money walks. Board meeting Wednesday. Fix it or I'm out." The line went dead before she could respond. Catherine set down the phone with hands that wanted to shake, forced them. Still stared at the reports that all said the same thing. We don't know what's wrong. But somewhere in this building, someone had to know. Someone always knew. The bus to Meridian Engine Works took 42 minutes through morning traffic. James stood near the back door holding the overhead rail, watching Detroit slide past fogged windows. November cold turned the glass into abstract art frost fractals and condensation trails that blurred the city into impressionism. Empty storefronts, churches converted to community centers, houses with plywood windows, and dreams that died in 2008. He'd grown up 3 blocks from here back when the auto plants ran 3 shifts, and you could smell prosperity in the exhaust fumes. Summer, 1983. James's father working on a neighbor's Plymouth in their driveway. Sunday afternoon heat, thick enough to chew. David's hands moving with absolute certainty. No wasted motion, each action purposeful and precise. An engine has a heart, son. You listen with your ears, your mind, and your soul. Young James had placed his palm against the Plymouth's engine block, feeling heat and vibration. "I can hear it, Dad. It's struggling, like it hurts." David had smiled, pride lighting his weathered face. "That's right. Now I'll teach you how to heal it." The bus passed the corner where Carter's Auto Repair used to stand. Now it was a Dollar General bright yellow sign advertising deals on everything James couldn't afford. 15 years he'd run that shop, built it from nothing after working other people's garages for a decade. Customers who came back because he listened to their cars the way his father taught him. Then Rebecca got sick. Stage 4, the kind of cancer that laughed at insurance coverage limits. $580,000 in medical debt. The garage couldn't carry it. The house couldn't carry it. Everything went to the hospitals, and still it wasn't enough. She died anyway. And James kept existing because Emma needed him to, because Rebecca made him promise. The bus stopped at Meridian's employee entrance. James swiped his ID badge at security, a young guard who'd been checking him in for 3 years without ever learning his name. The service elevator smelled like industrial cleaner and defeat. 40th floor. The maintenance cart waited in the supply closet bucket already filled with chemical-sharp cleaning solution mop heads freshly laundered. 8:30 a.m. Same routine every day. Executive offices first, then conference rooms, bathrooms, break areas, working his way down through the building floor by floor until his shift ended at 5 o'clock. Most days James was invisible. That was the deal he'd made with himself when medical bills devoured everything. Be invisible, keep your head down, cash the check, don't make waves. Invisibility was survival in a world that had already taken everything it could from him. But today, invisibility would crack. The maintenance cart rolled smooth across marble that cost more per square foot than James earned in a week. He moved through Meridian's executive floor like a ghost present, but unseen, necessary, but unacknowledged. At 8:45 a.m., he pushed his cart past the workshop on the 40th floor. His hands kept moving swish of mop across already clean floor, but his attention shifted toward the glass walls. Behind the glass sat Meridian's prototype marine engine on its test stand, 7 feet long and 4 feet tall. The Atlas PM, $7,504 million of American engineering, designed to power next-generation cargo vessels through Pacific routes. The workshop was empty this early, engineers not due until 9:30. But the engine waited in standby mode, sensors blinking, amber cooling fans whispering. Somewhere deep in its mechanical heart, fuel waited in pressurized lines for ignition that wouldn't come for another hour. James stopped, set down his mop, pressed his palm against the glass. He closed his eyes, slowed his breathing, let the building's ambient noise, HVAC systems, distant conversations, the hum of fluorescent lights fade into background static. And then he heard it. Not with his ears alone, but with the part of himself David had trained over 15 years of Sunday afternoons, the part that knew engines spoke in frequencies most people dismissed as mechanical noise. The Atlas's standby systems created a symphony, fuel pumps maintaining pressure, servos adjusting valve positions, electronic controls cycling through diagnostic routines. Beneath it all, buried in the harmonics, James found what he was looking for. A hesitation, a stutter so subtle it was almost subliminal. Fuel rail number 3. Every 3.2 seconds a pressure fluctuation that shouldn't exist. James's lips moved soundlessly, counting. 1,000, 2, 1,003, 1,000 there. The pressure spike barely perceptible but consistent. He opened his eyes and pulled a worn notebook from his uniform pocket, pages filled with 2 weeks of observations recorded in cramped handwriting. Flipped to the current page, wrote, Test 47. Fuel rail 3 pressure fluctuation every 3.2 seconds. Bar to PSI conversion error 0.08%. Compounds across 47 subsystems by 11:47. Thermal cascade. James had been watching this engine die for 2 weeks, standing outside the workshop every night after his shift ended, timing the failures with his father's old watch, a Timex with a cracked crystal that still kept perfect time. Every test followed the same choreography: 0 minutes ignition, smooth start. 2:30, all systems nominal. 5 minutes temperature climbing normally. 8:15 first stress indicators appear. 11 minutes thermal readings approaching critical. 11:47 emergency shutdown. Every single time. The engineers saw random malfunction. James heard the engine screaming in a language no one else understood. Detroit Power Systems in Dearborn built the Atlas's fuel system calibrated in bar pressure for precision engineering. But the GE controller from upstate New York read PSY because that's what GE's legacy systems used. 2 American companies, different measurement standards meeting in one engine. The conversion created a 0.08% error, microscopic, negligible in any single component. But the Atlas had 47 interconnected subsystems, each one compounding that tiny error like interest on a debt no one knew they owed. By 11 minutes and 47 seconds, the accumulated discrepancy triggered safety protocols designed to prevent catastrophic failure. The engine wasn't broken. It was being killed by the very systems meant to protect it. Above James, a security camera swiveled slightly. The lens focused. Red recording light blinked steady. Someone was watching him watch the engine. James felt the weight of observation but didn't look up. He closed his notebook, returned it to his pocket, picked up his mop, went back to being invisible. But the camera kept recording. And somewhere in this building someone was reviewing footage of a janitor who stood outside a classified workshop for 2 weeks, eyes closed, lips moving like prayer. Catherine sat behind her desk, reviewing failure reports when her assistant knocked. Jessica Chen, 28, hired 6 months ago, still believed hard work and loyalty meant something in corporate America. Ma'am security flagged unusual behavior. The maintenance worker. Catherine didn't look up from her tablet. What maintenance worker? Night custodial staff. He's been observing the Atlas workshop every night for 2 weeks. That got Catherine's attention. She set down the tablet. Show me. Jessica pulled up video on the wall-mounted display. Black and white security footage timestamp in the corner 234700. The screen showed a man in Meridian coveralls standing outside the workshop. Not working, not cleaning, just standing. Eyes closed, lips moving slightly, posture suggesting deep concentration rather than casual observation. Scroll back, Catherine said. How many nights Jessica toggled through footage, different dates, same behavior, same man, same position, same timestamp, 2347, 14 nights, 2 weeks of identical behavior. Who is he? Jessica consulted her tablet. James Carter, maintenance staff, 3 years with Meridian, background check shows bankruptcy, 2022 medical debt. Former small business owner. No criminal record. Lives in Dearborn. Catherine zoomed the footage until James's face filled the screen, studied his expression in the harsh fluorescent light of the empty corridor. This wasn't the face of corporate espionage, no furtiveness, no guilty glances at cameras. This was the face of someone solving a puzzle. Catherine's mind raced through possibilities. He's stealing trade secrets, but for whom and why stand in front of cameras doing it? He's mentally unstable, possible, but the behavior was too consistent, too purposeful. He knows something. Catherine looked at the Atlas through her office window. $4 million sitting idle, because no one, not Derek Mitchell with his Harvard MBA, not Ashley Parker fresh from MIT, not the entire engineering staff could explain why it failed at exactly 11:47, but a janitor was spending his nights watching it fail, timing it, understanding it. Bring him up here, Catherine said. Now. Jessica hesitated. Ma'am, he's maintenance. Shouldn't we go through his supervisor first? Protocol, I don't care about protocol. Get him up here in the next 5 minutes or find a new job. Jessica fled. Alone in her office, Catherine made a calculation she'd been avoiding. If the Atlas failed test 48 tomorrow, Bobby Sullivan would pull his $60 million. The board would demand her resignation at Wednesday's meeting. Meridian would collapse under the weight of falsified reports she'd been filing for 18 months. Her father had faced ruin, once chose suicide over shame. Catherine had sworn she'd never be that weak, never be that cornered. But here she was, 3 days from a board meeting, 47 consecutive failures, and a janitor who might know something everyone else missed. It wasn't desperation that made her summon James Carter. It was desperation's smarter sister, calculated risk. If he failed, she lost nothing. He was already nothing in her hierarchy. If he succeeded, she bought time, maybe survival. And if he tried to embarrass her, she had contingencies. She always had contingencies. Catherine pulled up James's personnel file, studied his background. Carter's Auto Repair, 2007 to 2022. Bankruptcy, filing $580,000. Spouse deceased, 2021. One dependent, Emma Carter, 27, nursing student, Pennsylvania. She committed that name to memory. Emma Carter. Leverage if needed. Catherine checked her reflection in the window, platinum hair, perfect makeup, flawless black suit tailored to project authority. Every detail in place. The mask was ready. Now she just needed to see if a janitor could do what her expensive engineers couldn't. The conference room occupied the 40th floor's northeast corner glass table, reflecting fluorescent lights, 15 engineers with laptops and defensive expressions. 8 weeks of failure documented in charts that all said the same thing: we don't know why. Derek Mitchell sat at Catherine's right hand, 42 years old, Harvard MBA, framed on his office wall, arrogance wrapped in tailored suit. He'd been lead engineer on the Atlas for 6 months, each failure carved a little deeper into his professional pride. Ashley Parker occupied a seat at the far end of the table, 25 MYT diploma, still fresh blonde hair pulled back in professional ponytail, daughter of an Indianapolis physics teacher who'd taught her to respect knowledge wherever it came from. She watched the door with curiosity rather than Derek's defensive hostility. Security escorted James in at 9:32 a.m. He stopped just inside the doorway, aware that every eye in the room was evaluating him and finding him wanting. Blue coveralls with Meridian Engine Works embroidered over the heart. Name tag reading J. Carter, Maintenance. 55-year-old face weathered by decades of work. Hands scarred from wrenches and screwdrivers. Posture that said, "I don't belong here," without speaking a word. Catherine let the silence stretch power move, make him uncomfortable, establish hierarchy. "Your name, James Carter, ma'am. What's your position here?" "Mr. Carter, maintenance staff, ma'am." Catherine activated the wall display. Security footage played James outside the workshop 14 nights in sequence, all at 23:47. "Then why have you been standing outside our workshop every night like some kind of stalker? Do you realize I could terminate you for corporate espionage?" The engineers shifted. This was entertainment now, a janitor about to be destroyed, something to break up the monotony of failure. James met Catherine's eyes without flinching. "I wasn't spying, ma'am. I was listening." Derek Mitchell laughed, sound like breaking glass, sharp and dismissive. Listening to what a $4 million Marine engine talking to you? James turned his attention to Derek. The room temperature seemed to drop 5 degrees. "Yes, sir. And it's saying you're killing it." Silence. Every laptop stopped clicking. Every breath held. The kind of silence that precedes explosion or revelation, no one yet knew which. Catherine's expression shifted from anger to something more dangerous: interest. "Explain." James's voice remained level, conversational, the tone of someone explaining basic mathematics to a child who'd been using calculus wrong. "Your fuel system was built by Detroit Power Systems in Dearborn, calibrated in bar pressure for precision engineering. But your GE controller from upstate New York reads PSI because that's what GE's legacy systems used." He paused, let them process. 2 American companies, different measurement standards, same result. Each conversion creates a 0.08% error. Small, but across 47 subsystems it compounds. By 11 minutes and 47 seconds, thermal cascade triggers emergency shutdown. Derek's face flushed red. "That's nonsense. Diagnostics show no conversion errors." James's response was gentle, which made it cut deeper. "Because your diagnostics use the same flawed standard, Mr. Mitchell. You're measuring the problem with the tool that created it." Ashley Parker rose from her seat at the far end, hands trembling slightly as she addressed James across the gulf of education and credibility that separated them. "Mr. Carter, where did you study?" The question hung in air like smoke. James's answer was simple. "My father's garage, Detroit. I don't have a degree, Miss Parker." Catherine looked at James's hands, scarred knuckles, calluses from decades of work, fingernails permanently stained despite scrubbing. Then she looked at her own hands, manicured weekly at a salon where they served champagne with pedicures pale and smooth except for the tremor she couldn't quite control. 2 people from different worlds, both carrying weight no one else could see. Her phone buzzed on the conference table. Caller ID Bob Sullivan. She didn't answer. The phone stopped buzzing, then immediately started again. Catherine made her decision. It felt like jumping off a cliff and hoping someone built a bridge on the way down. "Fine. Derek, contact everyone. Board members, engineers, Sullivan and his delegation. Tell them to be here at 2 p.m. today." Derek leaned forward, voice sharp with challenge. "Catherine, that's not nearly enough time." Catherine turned to James, and in that moment her carefully constructed mask slipped enough for everyone in the room to see the desperation underneath. "You'll fix that engine in front of everyone. 2 hours after they arrive." James's voice stayed quiet. "Ma'am, I'm not authorized to work on equipment." Catherine moved closer, stood directly in front of James, close enough he could smell her perfume, expensive and cold like everything else about her. Her voice dropped to a whisper that the conference room microphone barely caught. 2 hours. Carter. Succeed. I'll give you a new life. Shop supervisor. 120,000 a year. Health insurance, retirement. Everything you lost." She paused. Let him taste the possibility. "But if you fail, and we both know you're going to fail, I will destroy you. Not just fire you, destroy you. I'll make sure you never work with engines again. Not here, not in Detroit, not anywhere in this country. Your name will be toxic. Your daughter Emma in Pittsburgh with her student loans and her nursing career, I'll make one phone call. Every hospital in Pennsylvania will know her father is a fraud. You will have nothing. You will be nothing." James looked into Catherine's eyes and saw not cruelty, but terror. A woman drowning who'd grabbed onto him as a life raft without caring if she pulled him under too. He thought about Rebecca in the hospice bed, hand thin as paper, voice reduced to whisper, "Promise me you'll find your way back." He'd carried that promise for 3 years like a stone in his chest. "Start the clock, ma'am." Catherine blinked, thrown by the quiet certainty in his response. She'd expected begging or excuses, maybe anger, not acceptance, not challenge. The maintenance closet measured 8 feet by 10 feet, industrial shelving stacked with cleaning supplies, spare parts for floor buffers, boxes of light bulbs and paper towels. James had spent 3 years storing invisibility in this room. But in the back corner, hidden behind a case of toilet paper, sat something that mattered more than anything Meridian Engine Works had ever manufactured. James pulled out the metal toolbox and set it on the concrete floor, sat cross-legged beside it like a monk. Before an altar, ran his hands across scratched red paint and rust spots that refused to surrender despite decades of Michigan weather. David Carter had carried this box to Ford every day for 35 years through 3 recessions, 2 plant closures, union strikes, and corporate restructurings that treated human beings like budget line items. The handle was worn smooth by his father's grip. The latches still clicked with the same metallic certainty they had in 1960. James opened it with reverence reserved for sacred things. Socket wrenches in graduated sizes, needle-nose pliers with red rubber grips, wire strippers that still cut clean after 50 years, screwdrivers with wooden handles darkened by hand oil and time, the patina of work that could never be replicated by anything new. These tools had fixed thousands of engines, had fed a family through economic collapse, had taught a son that competence was its own kind of wealth. Summer, 1983. James, 13 years old, watching his father work on that Plymouth. Detroit heat cicadas screaming in the elm trees. David's hands moving with absolute certainty, no wasted motion, each action purposeful and precise, like watching a master pianist. An engine has a heart, son. You listen with your ears, your mind, and your soul. Young James placing his palm against the engine block metal, warm from running, vibrating with internal combustion explosions, happening 30 times per second, controlled violence converted into motion. "I can hear it, Dad. It's struggling. Like it hurts." David smiling, and in that moment James seeing something he'd spent his whole life chasing, his father's pride. "That's right, son. Now I'll teach you how to heal it." James pulled out the notebook he'd been keeping for 2 weeks, flipped through pages of observations, sketches, calculations. The math wasn't elegant. His community college courses had been interrupted by David's death, by starting work, by building a life that didn't leave room for finishing formal education. But the conclusions were sound. He'd checked them 17 different ways. The Atlas PM7500 was dying from a problem so simple that expensive engineers missed it because they were looking for something complicated. 3 days ago, James had ordered a Johnson Controls JCPN7ML544 adapter using his own credit card. $58 for the part, $20 shipping, $78 he absolutely could not afford. But something in him needed to prove this was solvable, needed to prove David's teaching still mattered in a world that valued credentials over competence. The adapter had arrived yesterday, sat in his locker, now wrapped in bubble wrap, waiting. An unremarkable piece of brushed aluminum the size of a hockey puck designed to bridge the gap between measurement standards invented by engineers who never imagined their systems would need to talk to each other. A $78 part to fix a $4 million problem. If he was right. If he was wrong, Catherine would destroy Emma's future to prove a point about power. James stood slowly, knees protesting back tight from 3 years of mopping floors, picked up the toolbox. 4 hours until showtime. Time to prove that listening mattered more than degrees. Catherine's assistant spent 4 hours on the phone calling in favors accumulated over 6 months of 80-hour weeks. She leaned on relationships, made promises she wasn't sure Catherine would honor, used the magic words, "Emergency board matter," and Bobby Sullivan will be in attendance. By 1 p.m. she'd assembled the impossible 200 people on 4 hours' notice. Meridian's main assembly hall occupied half of the 35th floor, 15,000 square feet normally used for product launches and investor presentations. Today it became theater arena courtroom. Rows of chairs facing the workshop window, 40 feet of glass separating audience from performance space. Press cameras in the back. Catherine had personally approved media presence live stream equipment being tested by IT staff. YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook Live. Catherine's decision: if this is triumph, the world watches us succeed. If it's humiliation, at least we control the footage. Either way, Meridian Engine Works would be on record. Robert Sullivan walked through the assembly hall doors at 1:45 p.m. like he owned the building, which, if this demo failed, he essentially would after bankruptcy proceedings. 68 years old, 6'2" of West Texas oil money, turned rare earth billions. His suit probably cost more than James's car, but Sullivan wore it like work clothes. The Texas drawl had been worn smooth by decades of boardrooms, but you could still hear pathos in certain words. He'd started with nothing, high school diploma and a job on oil rigs. Built his first company in 1982 with $5,000 borrowed from a credit union. Now he sat on 17 corporate boards with $8 billion in net worth, and he treated every dollar like it was still that first $5,000. Sullivan settled into the front row without greeting Catherine. Pale blue eyes fixed on the workshop window where the Atlas PM7500 waited on its test stand. 2 male aides and 1 female analyst flanked him, all wearing earpieces, all carrying tablets, all radiating professional skepticism. Dr. Margaret Reynolds arrived at 1:52 p.m. because she'd spent 30 years learning that being late to anything was permission for people to ignore you. 58 years old, former Boeing senior engineer turned independent consultant industry legend for 2 reasons. The Alaska Airlines crash that destroyed her career in 2000 and the 25 years of meticulous work she'd done since to earn back trust. Bobby Sullivan had hired her 6 months ago to evaluate Meridian's technical capabilities. Her preliminary report, 30 pages of analysis, sat in Sullivan's briefcase right now. Bottom line, Meridian has serious management issues but potentially salvageable technology. Margaret took a seat beside Sullivan and pulled out her tablet, opened a document titled Atlas PM7500 Failure Analysis, Preliminary Conclusions. She'd reviewed 8 weeks of test data, consulted with former colleagues in marine propulsion, reached the same dead end as Meridian's engineering team. The failures appeared random, but random failures didn't repeat with mechanical precision. Something was wrong with their diagnostic approach. Margaret just hadn't figured out what. Until today. Maybe. She pulled up live video feeds from the workshop's 6 cameras, studied the Atlas sitting silent on its test stand. $4 million waiting to prove itself or die trying. 7 board members arrived in a cluster at 1:55 p.m. Executives who collectively owned 43% of Meridian's stock, enough voting power to remove Catherine if they achieved consensus. They took seats in middle rows, whispering among themselves, glancing at Catherine with expressions ranging from concern to predatory interest. Thomas Brennan led the pack, 68, silver-haired, looking like Central Casting's idea of corporate America. He'd been pushing for Catherine's removal for 6 months. This demo would either shut him up or give him the ammunition he needed. Derek Mitchell arrived with 28 engineers in tow at 1:58 p.m., everyone who'd worked on the Atlas in some capacity. Their jobs depended on making it work. Watching a janitor attempt what they couldn't was either salvation or insult. The room would decide which. Ashley Parker took a seat near Derek, but not beside him, pulled out her tablet, and opened the Atlas's technical specifications, started cross-referencing fuel system documentation. Something nagging at the back of her mind about James's conversion error theory. 200 people in person. Live stream already showing 11,000 viewers online. Word had spread through engineering forums and LinkedIn. Anonymous accounts in the chat speculating, this is either going to be legendary or the most embarrassing thing ever. Anyone know who the maintenance guy is? I'm rooting for him, but this seems insane. Catherine Drake walked to the podium at exactly 2:00 p.m., not 1:59, not 2:01. Precision was power. She wore a Ralph Lauren purple label suit, $8,000 of American tailoring in navy wool. Hair and makeup perfect. Every detail calculated to project authority and control. But her hands gripped the podium edge hard enough to whiten her knuckles, and anyone watching closely could see the tremor she couldn't suppress, small earthquake running through the foundation of her composure. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming on short notice. Her voice carried to the back row years of board presentations, teaching her how to project without shouting. Pause. Let the crowd settle into uncomfortable silence. We have an unusual situation. Another pause. Catherine had learned that silence made people lean forward, pay attention. This is James Carter. For 3 years he's been our maintenance staff. This morning he claimed he could repair the engine our team hasn't solved in 8 weeks. Murmurs rippled through the audience like wind through wheat. I'm giving him 2 hours to prove it. Margaret Reynolds leaned forward, studying James with the intensity of someone evaluating an unexpected variable, the maintenance uniform, the weathered face, the posture that suggested hard-won competence rather than academic training. She'd met men like this before at Boeing in her years consulting for manufacturers across the country, the kind who learned engineering through hands and intuition rather than textbooks. Usually they worked in obscurity. Sometimes they were brilliant. If Mr. Carter succeeds, he becomes shop supervisor at $120,000 per year. Someone in the back row whistled soft sound, quickly shushed. If he fails, he's terminated immediately, and Meridian Engine Works will need to explain to our investors why we've wasted 8 weeks and millions of dollars on a project that couldn't be fixed. Bobby Sullivan rose from his front row seat without warning. His Texas drawl cut through the room like wire through butter plain, but weighted with 40 years of billion-dollar decisions. Excuse me, Mrs. Drake. Catherine's face went pale. Interruption wasn't part of the script. If this man fails, my $60 million also walks. I'm putting every person in this room on notice. The threat was explicit, absolute, no negotiation. Catherine's face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Pale shock, flushed anger, then rigid control. Yes, Mr. Sullivan. I understand completely. She gestured toward the workshop entrance, hands steady despite the terror in her eyes. Mr. Carter, you have 2 hours starting now. James walked to the workshop entrance under 200 pairs of eyes, all weighing him, measuring him, finding him inadequate before he touched a single tool. The security guard at the door checked his temporary access badge, laminated card that said Workshop Access, temporary in red letters that felt like a warning label. Guard stepped aside. James entered climate-controlled space sealed by glass walls on 3 sides, turned the workshop into an aquarium where he was the specimen on display. 6 HD cameras mounted in corners capturing every angle for the live stream. Main feed focused on his face. Secondary feed showing his hands, the engine diagnostic screens. The live stream chat scrolled past on tablets in the audience. Here we go. This is either genius or the saddest thing I've ever seen. Why is my heart pounding for a stranger? Please let him succeed. The Atlas PM7500 dominated the center of the room, 7 feet long, 4 feet tall, masterpiece of American engineering wrapped in cooling systems and sensor arrays. $4 million of machinery that had failed 47 consecutive tests. James approached it slowly, boots clicking on epoxy-coated floor. Each step recorded by 6 cameras for immediate broadcast to 11,000 strangers. He stopped beside the engine, placed both hands on the block. Around him, 200 people in the assembly hall fell absolutely silent, the kind of quiet that precedes revolution or revelation, no one yet knowing which. The live stream chat exploded. What is he doing? Is he praying? No, wait, he's listening. This is insane. I can't look away. Eyes closed, breathing slowed, the world reduced to metal under his palms, and the frequency of mechanical systems running in standby mode. He listened, not with his ears alone, but with the part of himself David had trained over 15 years of Sunday afternoons in a garage that smelled like motor oil and possibility. The engine systems hummed, their complex symphony pumps, servos, electronic controls. Buried beneath the surface noise, he found what he'd been hearing for 2 weeks. The pressure fluctuation in fuel rail 3, the stutter in injection timing, the mathematical error that no one else could hear because they were measuring it with tools calibrated to the same flawed standard. Margaret Reynolds pulled out her phone, opened the live stream on her screen, started reading comments. Someone had posted technical specifications for Detroit Power Systems fuel architecture. Someone else linked to GE's controller documentation. A third commenter, claiming to be a marine engineer in San Diego, wrote, "If there's a metric imperial conversion issue, he's right to check adapter protocols, but that's too simple." Meridian would have caught that. Margaret's mind sparked. Too simple. That was the problem. Everyone had been looking for complexity because complicated problems required complicated solutions. But engines didn't care about complexity. They just wanted to be understood. James opened his eyes. "Start the engine." Derek Mitchell, watching from the assembly hall, pulled out his tablet, activated the Atlas's remote start sequence. The engine roared to life, pistons firing in sequence, fuel pumps engaging, cooling systems spinning up. The sound was glorious, powerful, exactly what a $4 million engine should sound like. James kept his hands on the block, feeling vibrations travel through metal into bone. There, 2,400 RPM. Pressure spike in fuel rail 3 every 3.2 seconds. Derek checked his tablet, pulling up real-time diagnostics. The readings show normal operation. James's eyes stayed closed, voice calm, certain. "Your readings are wrong, Mr. Mitchell. The engine speaks truth. Machines don't lie." Margaret Reynolds stood abruptly, startling Sullivan beside her. She walked to the glass wall, pressing close enough her breath fogged the surface. When she spoke, her voice carried through the microphone system with crystalline clarity. "How long until thermal cascade?" James looked directly at her, recognized something in her intensity, reminded him of his father, of people who understood that engineering was listening, not talking. 11 minutes 47 seconds, like the previous 47 tests. Margaret nodded slowly. "Do you have a solution?" James pulled his worn notebook from his pocket, flipped to a page covered in pencil sketches and calculations. "I need a Johnson Controls JCPN7 ML544 adapter. Metric to Imperial Bridge. $58 at Granger Industrial Supply. Made in Milwaukee, Wisconsin." Someone in the back row laughed, harsh, disbelieving sound that echoed through the assembly hall. A $58 part fixes a $4 million problem. "This is absurd." James turned to face the man, quiet voice carrying to every corner of the silent room. "Sometimes the best solutions are the simplest ones, sir. We overcomplicate things because we think complicated problems need complicated answers. But the engine doesn't care about complexity. It just wants to be understood." Cameras zoomed on Catherine's face in the assembly hall, terror and desperate hope fighting for dominance. James walked to the parts cabinet, opened it, retrieved the adapter he'd ordered 3 days ago using his credit card he couldn't afford to use. $78 total with shipping. The cost of proving David Carter's teachings still mattered. Unwrapped it from bubble wrap, held it up to one of the 6 cameras, brushed aluminum size of a hockey puck. Unremarkable, except for what it represented: American engineering, bridging American engineering. 2 measurement standards meeting in one piece of metal, the solution hiding in plain sight. He set the adapter on the workbench, pulled David's toolbox close, opened it with reverence, began the work that would either save his life or destroy it. 6 cameras captured James's hands as he worked. Main feed showed fingers moving with practiced efficiency. Socket wrench, removing the existing connection assembly from fuel rail. 3 inspecting threads for damage, finding them clean. Secondary feeds displayed diagnostic screens updating in real-time crowd reactions in the assembly hall. Catherine's face cycling through stages of hope and dread. The live stream had grown to 14,000 viewers, chat scrolling too fast to read, engineers from around the world debating, speculating, rooting for or against the janitor who claimed he could do what credentials couldn't. James knelt beside fuel rail 3, tracing the line from the Detroit Power Systems fuel pump to the GE controller junction, found the connection point where bar-calibrated pressure met PSI reading sensors. The Johnson Controls adapter was designed for exactly this marriage of incompatible standards: brushed aluminum body, precision machined threads, internal calibration that would convert pressure readings through 7 decimal places instead of 6. The 0.08% error eliminated. Derek provided diagnostic tools from the assembly hall grudgingly via remote access. You'll need the GE diagnostic suite. Access code is on the tablet I'm sending in. A junior engineer brought the tablet, set it beside James without making eye contact, retreated quickly. David's socket wrench fit James's hand like prayer fits desperation. 15 minutes to install the adapter with precise torque, 45 Newton meters exactly per Johnson Controls specification. Behind the glass, Ashley Parker watched her tablet system logs updating as James's modifications rippled through the Atlas's architecture, each parameter shifting into new configuration. She pulled up Detroit Power Systems fuel specification sheet, found Appendix D pressure calibration standards. Bar to PSI conversion 14.5038 PSI per bar, rounded to 14.50 for processing efficiency. Her breath caught. Rounded to 14.50. The error was right there, documented in the spec sheet they'd all read during initial design review 8 weeks ago. 0.0038 rounded away. 0.08% error across the conversion. Ashley turned to Derek, who was pretending not to watch her screen. He's right. The conversion error is in Appendix D. We never caught it because we assumed Detroit Power and GE would account for cross-platform compatibility. Derek's jaw tightened, didn't argue. 8 weeks of failure had taught him when pride cost more than admission. With the adapter installed, James accessed the GE controller's firmware-navigated menus most engineers spent months learning. His fingers moved with certainty, muscle memory from 15 years running Carter's Auto Repair, updating engine control units for customers who trusted him with their vehicles. Adjusted fuel injection timing, recalibrated pressure sensors, remapped the fuel delivery curve to account for the adapter's 7 decimal place precision. Each change logged automatically, system status, updating on every engineer's screen in the assembly hall. They watched a janitor rewrite firmware they'd spent weeks analyzing. The live stream chat lit up. He's adjusting the injection map in real time. That's not standard procedure, but it makes sense. Is anyone else holding their breath? This is the most stressful thing I've ever watched. In the assembly hall, skepticism began cracking. Someone in the third row leaned forward. He knows what he's doing. Thomas Brennan, board member who'd been pushing for Catherine's removal, crossed his arms tighter. This wasn't supposed to work. A janitor wasn't supposed to solve what Harvard and MIT couldn't, but the diagnostic screens told truth. Machines couldn't lie about system parameters stabilizing into optimal ranges. James made the final adjustments while the engine ran like a surgeon operating on a beating heart, technically possible, but requiring absolute precision. Pressure valves adjusted in micro increments. Thermal sensors recalibrated. Safety protocols updated to reflect new baseline. Margaret Reynolds stood at the glass now tablet in hand, following every modification. She'd spent 30 years in aerospace engineering, recognized mastery when she saw it, regardless of where it came from. He's not guessing. Every adjustment is purposeful. He understands the system architecture. Sullivan's blue eyes tracked James through the glass. Where'd a maintenance worker learn advanced fuel injection mapping? Margaret smiled slightly. Same place my best engineers at Boeing learned, by actually touching the machinery instead of just modeling it. James stepped back from the engine at 3:40 p.m., wiped his hands on the rag from David's toolbox fabric, stained beyond redemption by decades of oil and solvent, but he'd never throw it away. Some things mattered more than appearance. Ready for testing. The engine had been running the entire 90 minutes James worked on it live, no shutdown, no safety margin. If he'd been wrong about anything, the Atlas would have cascaded into thermal failure while he was elbow-deep in its fuel system. But it hadn't. Wall clock in the assembly hall read 3:47 p.m. 1 hour and 47 minutes since James entered the workshop. 200 people sat in absolute silence. 14,000 viewers worldwide held breath. The only sound was the Atlas's steady, idle mechanical heartbeat waiting to prove itself or die. James stood beside the engine, one hand resting on the block, feeling the rhythm, combustion pressure, heat converted to rotational energy. Everything humans had learned about controlling explosions for useful work. 4 minutes. Whispers starting in the back rows. 5 minutes. Someone shifted in their seat, sound loud and quiet. 8 minutes. Tension building, engineers checking their tablets. 10 minutes. 3:58 p.m. People leaning forward. 11 minutes. 3:59 p.m. The moment approaching. Catherine gripped the armrests of her chair, knuckles white, breathing shallow. Every muscle in her body wound tight enough to snap. Bobby Sullivan leaned forward, expressionless blue eyes calculating the cost of failure. Margaret Reynolds held her tablet in both hands, temperature graphs climbing toward the threshold that had triggered 47 consecutive shutdowns. 11 minutes, 30 seconds. Sarah Mitchell checked her screen temperature, nominal pressure stable. Derek Mitchell stared at his diagnostics like they were a magic trick he couldn't explain. All parameters showing optimal. No stress indicators, no thermal cascade beginning. 11 minutes, 40 seconds. Someone in the back row gasped. Another person stood halfway up, then sat down again quickly. The live stream chat went insane. It's going to make it. Oh my God, I can't believe this. Come on, come on, come on. 11 minutes, 47 seconds. The moment every previous test had ended, emergency shutdown, thermal cascade failure, logged engineers staring at data that made no sense. But not today. Today, the Atlas PM7500 ran smooth and steady at 2,400 RPM. Temperature optimal. Pressure perfect. No errors logged anywhere in 47 subsystems. Ashley Parker gasped. Hand flew to her mouth. Derek Mitchell stared at his diagnostic screen, finger stabbing at the refresh button like it might change the impossible into something logical. Margaret Reynolds smiled, small expression that transformed her face. Recognition of something rare, competence meeting crisis, and winning. 12 minutes. Someone in the back row started clapping, tentative, at first unsure. 13 minutes. The applause spread like fire through dry grass. 14 minutes. People stood one by one, then in clusters, then the entire assembly hall on their feet. 15 minutes. The room erupted in cheers, 200 people acknowledging something they didn't entirely understand but couldn't deny. Thomas Brennan stood slowly last to rise, face carved from stone, clapped once, twice, then sat down again. This wasn't victory to him. This was complication. 16 minutes. Catherine remained seated, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face, mask shattered by relief and humiliation and something that might have been gratitude. 17 minutes. Bobby Sullivan was first to approach the glass Texas drawl, carrying through the microphone system. "Mr. Carter, you have saved my investment. I am grateful. He began to clap, slow, deliberate. The sound cut through the celebrating crowd like a conductor calling an orchestra to attention. Others joined him, synchronized applause, 200 people acknowledging the impossible made real. James didn't celebrate. Remained beside the engine, hand resting on warm metal, feeling the heartbeat that had finally found its rhythm. Through the glass he saw Catherine standing alone near the podium. Every eye had been on him. No one noticed the CEO crying. Their eyes met across 40 feet of glass and immeasurable distance of class and circumstance. Two people from different worlds, both changed by the past 2 hours in ways neither could yet articulate. Dr. Margaret Reynolds was first to the glass wall, drew Bobby Sullivan's attention by her movement. She pressed her hand against the surface, watching James through transparent barrier. When she spoke, her voice carried through the microphone system with authority, earned through 30 years of engineering, lost and rebuilt. "Where did you study, Mr. Carter?" James met her eyes, saw something familiar. There reminded him of David, of Sunday afternoons, learning to listen to engines speaking in frequencies most people dismissed as noise. "My father's garage, Detroit. I don't have a degree, ma'am." Margaret nodded slowly, gesture of recognition and respect that crossed the glass divide. "Your solution was elegant. Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is usually correct." She paused. Let the assembly hall hear her verdict. Most engineers wouldn't have seen it because they were looking for something complicated. You solved it because you listened instead of assumed. Bobby Sullivan walked to the glass beside Margaret, 6'2" of Texas oil money, studying James with the intensity of someone who'd built an empire by recognizing talent others overlooked. "Mr. Carter, you have saved my investment. I am grateful." His drawl made the words sound plain, but they carried the weight of 40 years making billion-dollar decisions. Catherine Drake approached the glass slowly. Every eye in the room followed her movement. The applause faded into silence again, audience waiting to see how the CEO would handle this moment of complete vulnerability in front of investors, employees, 14,000 strangers watching online. "You saved my company." James's voice was gentle, without triumph, without mockery. "I fixed an engine, ma'am. Saving the company is your job." Catherine extended her hand, palm pressed against the glass barrier between them. James matched the gesture from his side. Two hands separated by transparent inches, symbols of different worlds, touching without touching. CEO and janitor. Power and invisibility, meeting in a moment of acknowledgement. "Thank you, Mr. Carter." 6 cameras recorded the image from 6 angles. Main feed showed the moment in perfect composition. Catherine's hand on one side, James's on the other, glass between them reflecting light, one of them crying. Both of them changed. The live stream chat exploded. "I'm not crying, you're crying. This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Save this image. Someone make this a poster." Within an hour the image would be shared 10,000 times. By midnight, 30,000. Catherine Drake and James Carter, hands meeting through glass, the photograph that would define Meridian Engine Works' redemption or collapse depending on what happened next. Security escorted James out of the workshop. The crowd parted like water pats on back handshakes, congratulations. Engineers who'd dismissed him 2 hours ago now wanted to touch him as if competence was contagious through skin contact. James nodded, smiled, but didn't linger. He needed to get home. Process what just happened. Call Emma and tell her she didn't need to worry about tuition anymore because he'd done it against every odd, against credentials and hierarchy and the weight of invisibility. He'd proven David Carter's teaching still mattered. As James disappeared into the service elevator, his phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. He'd check it later. Right now, he just wanted to breathe. James sat on his bed at 7:30 p.m., still in his uniform, too tired to change. The adrenaline had burned off during the bus ride home, leaving behind exhaustion that felt like gravity increased tenfold. His phone showed 17 missed calls, 12 from numbers he didn't recognize, probably journalists. 3 from Emma. 2 from Meridian's HR department. He called Emma first. "Dad." Her voice carried joy and disbelief tangled together like vines. "I saw the video. It's everywhere. You're trending on LinkedIn." James smiled despite exhaustion. "I fixed an engine, sweetheart. That's all. That's not all, and you know it. Dad, you're a hero. There's articles being written. People are calling you the genius janitor and Emma." James's voice gentle but firm. "It's late. You have a shift tomorrow. Get some sleep." "Okay, but Dad, I'm proud of you. Mom would be so proud." James's throat tightened. "Thank you, kiddo. I love you. Love you too." He lay back on the bed, stared at the ceiling. Rebecca smiled at him from the nightstand photo 28 years ago, believing love and hard work were enough to build a life that couldn't be taken away. "I did it," he whispered to her image. "I found my way back just like I promised." Outside his window, snow fell harder now. Detroit winter settling in. The city looked almost clean under fresh powder-white blanket hiding scars underneath. James's eyes drifted closed. Tomorrow he'd figure out what shop supervisor at 120,000 meant. Tonight, he just needed to rest. 11:47 p.m. The phone rang, sound-shattering sleep like glass breaking. James jolted awake, disoriented. Phone screen glowing in the dark. Unknown number. He answered anyway. "Hello?" Catherine Drake's voice came through cold and precise, the vulnerability from earlier completely erased, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. "Don't celebrate yet, Carter." James sat up, turned on the bedside lamp. Outside his window, snow fell harder, accumulating on the sill, muffling the world. "What do you mean?" Catherine's voice carried the precision of a scalpel. "I've done my research. Carter's auto repair bankruptcy filing 2022. $580,000 in medical debt. Your wife Rebecca. Cancer." James's hand tightened on the phone. "That's none of your business. Everything about the man who humiliated me is my business. I didn't humiliate you. I fixed an engine." Catherine continued like he hadn't spoken. She'd spent the past 7 hours having her people dig through James's life, finding every crack, every wound. "I also found customer complaints, safety violations, a lawsuit settled out of court in 2008. James's voice went hard. "The lawsuit was fraudulent. Customer claimed I installed faulty brakes, but state inspection proved the failure was from wear, not workmanship. We settled because fighting it would have cost more than paying. I don't care what it was, Carter. I care what it looks like." She paused. Let that sink in. Disgraced mechanic tricks investors. Janitor with history of safety violations gets promoted. I can see the headlines already. For the first time since Rebecca died, James felt genuine fury. Not grief, not exhaustion, but pure rage at someone trying to take from him again when he had so little left to lose. "What do you want?" Catherine's voice dropped to a whisper, quieter, therefore more menacing than any shout could be. "Resign tomorrow morning. Write a letter saying you got lucky. Return to maintenance. $800 a week. Invisibility, same as before. And if I refuse, then I don't just fire you, Carter. I destroy you." Her voice carried absolute certainty. This wasn't bluff, this was promise. Dead wife, failed business, settled lawsuit. I'll make sure every news outlet knows your complete history. Every interview request, I'll provide context they won't fact-check. Your reputation, what little you built today, will be ash by Friday. She paused, loaded the final bullet. "And your daughter, Emma Carter, 27 years old, nursing student at Pittsburgh General. $40,000 in student loans. Night shift in pediatrics." James's blood turned to ice. How would her future employers react if they knew her father was a fraud? One phone call. Carter. One conversation with the right person. Hospital networks talk. Medical boards review applications carefully. Questions about character, about family, about whether someone can be trusted with vulnerable patients if their own father can't be trusted with engines. She'll spend the rest of her life wondering why she can't get hired, never knowing it was because of you. James couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The phone pressed against his ear felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. All he could see was Emma, 6 years old, helping him in the garage while Rebecca made dinner. 16, getting her first job to help with bills. 27, working night shifts to pay for school because she wanted to help people the way nurses had helped Rebecca in those final weeks. Everything he'd done surviving 3 years of invisibility, fixing that engine, keeping Rebecca's promise, all of it was to give Emma a chance at a life better than his. And Catherine Drake had just threatened to take that away. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely controlled rage. "Don't you dare mention my daughter." For a moment, the mask slipped. James heard something else in her voice, not cruelty but pain maybe, or recognition of herself in his fury. "What kind of person are you?" Catherine's response came after a heartbeat. "The kind who survives Carter. You don't understand. You never will." The line went dead. James sat in the lamplight, phone still pressed to his ear, listening to silence. On his nightstand, Rebecca smiled at him from their wedding photo 28 years ago, when they'd believed love and hard work were enough. "Promise me you'll find your way back." He'd thought he kept that promise today. Now Catherine Drake was threatening to push him off the cliff before he could take the second step. His phone buzzed. Different number. Text message from unknown sender. "Mr. Carter, this is Dr. Margaret Reynolds. We need to talk tonight. About Catherine Drake." James stared at the message, then at Rebecca's photo, then out the window at snow falling on Detroit. He texted back, "Where and when? Response immediate, my hotel. Now. Renaissance Center, room 4012. James stood, put on his jacket, snow melting off the fabric as apartment heat hit it. He looked once more at Rebecca's photo. "I don't know what's happening, but I'm not running anymore." Left the apartment. Midnight bus routes ran slow through Detroit winter. James stood near the back door, same position as every morning commute. But tonight the city looked different. Streetlights haloed by falling snow, empty roads, occasional car passing headlights cutting through white curtains like searchlights. He'd ridden this bus for 3 years to Meridian back home, same route, same stops, invisible among night shift workers and people whose lives happened in margins of daylight. But tonight he wasn't invisible anymore, and that terrified him more than obscurity ever had. The Renaissance Center rose 40 floors above the Detroit River, glass and steel catching city lights, monument to ambition that survived the city's collapse and resurrection. James arrived at 12:25 a.m., lobby heated, security barely glancing at him before waving toward elevators. Room 4012. Margaret had texted. 40th floor, same level as Meridian's workshop. Symbolic somehow, like the universe insisting certain altitudes mattered for transformation. Elevator opened onto plush carpet sconces, casting warm light doors numbered in brass plates that probably cost more than James's monthly rent. He found 4012 Northwest corner, knocked once. Door opened on first knock. "Doctor?" Margaret Reynolds stood there, 58 years old, still dressed despite the hour. Gray hair pulled back, reading glasses on chain around her neck, face that had seen Boeing boardrooms and federal investigations and 30 years rebuilding trust. She stepped aside without greeting, gestured James into a suite that cost more per night than his monthly rent. "Coffee, please." Northwest corner view, floor-to-ceiling windows showing Belle Isle across the Detroit River. The island's old lighthouse rotating its beacon through darkness, sweeping across water that separated Michigan from itself. Margaret moved to a French press on the desk, poured 2 cups with the efficiency of someone who'd spent decades in labs and workshops where coffee was fuel rather than pleasure, handed James a mug. Ceramic warm against his cold hands, settled into a chair by the window. James took the sofa, sank into cushions that probably cost more than his car. "Tell me about Catherine's call. Not did she call or what happened." She knew. Somehow she'd known Catherine would strike tonight. James told her everything: Catherine's threats, the weaponized research, the promise to destroy Emma's nursing career, the demand for resignation. Margaret listened without interrupting, fingers steepled under her chin, processing information, the way engineers process data, systematically looking for patterns and failure points. When James finished, Margaret set down her coffee cup, stood, walked to the window with her back to him, silhouette against the city lights. "She's panicking," James's voice hard. "She threatened my daughter." Margaret turned from the window. In the dim light, James saw pain that time hadn't erased. "No, she's showing you where you're vulnerable. It's tactical, not personal. Catherine doesn't attack strength, she attacks love. That's how terrified people operate. How do you know so much about her?" Margaret returned to her chair, picked up her coffee, took a long sip, like she needed fortification for what came next. "Because 30 years ago, I was her." She set the cup down with deliberate care. 1995, I was 28. Boeing's youngest senior engineer. I climbed over anyone who got in my way. No friends, no family. Just work and ambition. She paused, memory crossing her face like shadow. Then there was an accident. James leaned forward, something in her tone making his chest tight. Alaska Airlines Flight 261, January 2000. Stabilizer jack screw failure. 88 people died because I missed a detail during final review. James remembered the crash investigation lawsuits that lasted years. The news said it was maintenance failure. Margaret nodded. That's what Boeing's lawyers argued successfully. But I knew. The engineering team knew. We'd signed off on a design with a critical flaw, buried it in paperwork because admitting it would have cost billions. I was fired quietly, blacklisted from aerospace, lost everything I'd built. She pulled a photograph from her tablet case, edges worn from handling, handed it to James. The image showed a younger version of Margaret standing beside a man in a garage, both covered in grease, both smiling. Timestamp, June 1994. James's breath caught. The man was David Carter, his father. A Ford engineer in Detroit heard about me, reached out, offered to teach me to rebuild engines in his garage. She looked at James directly. Said I still had value even if I'd made mistakes. Said failure doesn't define people, how they respond to it does. James held the photograph carefully, stared at his father's face, frozen in a moment of generosity David had never mentioned. Wait, I always believed Dad died in 1994. Heart attack in his garage. Margaret shook her head gently. He had a heart attack in 1993, nearly died. Paramedics revived him. He spent 2 months in cardiac rehab. She paused. Then he went back to Ford for another year. He finally passed in 1995. I was there for the funeral. James's world tilted sideways. Every memory he'd built around his father's death was off by a year. Timeline he'd carried for 31 years had a hole in it, shaped like information no one shared. Why didn't anyone tell me Margaret's voice was careful, navigating family history that wasn't hers to judge? Your father asked them not to. He didn't want you leaving college to take care of him. Made the family promise they'd tell you it was sudden, painless, that he didn't suffer. David wanted you to have your own life, not sacrifice it for his illness. Silence filled the hotel room, heating system cycling on distant traffic 40 floors below. James looked at the photograph again. His father alive, a year longer than he'd known, teaching someone else the skills James had learned in childhood, passing on knowledge like a relay race where the torch never went out. He was protecting me even when it cost him my presence at the end. That's the kind of man your father was. Margaret stood, walked to her briefcase, pulled out another folder. This one, physical paper, not digital, the weight of documentation that couldn't be deleted or hacked. David left these with me before he died, asked me to give them to you when you were ready. She handed James a stack of engineering notebooks, 12 volumes bound in black canvas. David Carter's name printed on each spine in silver marker. James opened the first one. His father's handwriting, technical sketches, solutions to problems that wouldn't exist for another decade. Hybrid engine concepts, 1987. Variable valve timing, 1990. Direct injection optimization, 1992. David had been inventing the future in a garage while Ford executives ignored him because he lacked credentials. The last notebook contained a letter on the final page dated June 10, 1995, 2 weeks before David died. James read it aloud, voice breaking. James, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and Margaret has decided you're ready. I'm sorry I wasn't there longer, but I'm leaving you something more valuable than money or property, the ability to hear what others can't. The world doesn't recognize people like us, no degrees, no fancy schools, but engines don't care about that. They speak truth to anyone who listens. Listen, son, fix what's broken, including people. Make me proud. Love, Dad. James's eyes blurred with tears held back for 31 years. Grief for the father who'd died protecting him. Pride for the legacy that shaped him without his knowing. Margaret waited in respectful silence, understanding that some moments required space rather than comfort. Why are you telling me this now? I don't know. Margaret opened her tablet, pulled up a file folder that expanded into dozens of documents, financial records, news articles, police reports, psychiatric evaluations. Because you need to understand Catherine Drake. She's not evil, James. She's broken. And broken people hurt others to protect themselves from being hurt again. Margaret swiped through documents while she spoke, each screen revealing another layer of Catherine Drake's history, like peeling back scar tissue to expose the wound beneath. Catherine Drake, born 1973, Detroit. Father was Richard Drake, founded Drake Manufacturing in 1965, built it into a $50 million company over 25 years. Then in 1989, his business partners embezzled $4 million, framed him for it. Richard faced 15 years in federal prison. Margaret pulled up a newspaper clipping headline screaming across the top, "Drake Manufacturing CEO found dead. Apparent suicide." Photo beneath showed Richard Drake in better days standing in front of his factory, arm around a teenage girl who looked like a younger version of Catherine. Same platinum hair, same sharp features, same eyes that suggested she'd already learned the world was cruel. Catherine was 16. She found him in his office. He'd hanged himself from the sprinkler pipe. Left a note saying he couldn't face prison, couldn't watch his family lose everything because of his weakness. Margaret swiped to a bankruptcy filing. Catherine's mother lost the house, cars, savings, everything seized to pay debts and legal fees. Catherine dropped out of high school, worked 3 jobs to support her mother and younger brother. 16 years old. Night shifts at a diner, weekend shifts at a factory, morning shifts at a dry cleaner. She paused, let James absorb the weight of it. 10 years later, she'd saved enough to start Meridian Engine Works in her father's name. Built it from nothing into a $400 million company over another 15 years. James studied the document's timeline of survival built on terror of becoming her father. Success story. Survival story. There's a difference. Margaret brought up another document marked confidential. Board eyes only. Financial statements from Meridian's internal audits showing discrepancies between reported performance and actual results. Catherine's been falsifying reports for 18 months. Hiding failures, inflating successes, booking future revenue as current income, rushing safety certifications despite unresolved concerns. She scrolled through page after page of evidence. Total fraud exposure, approximately $45 million across 8 major contracts. James processed this puzzle, pieces clicking into place. She's terrified of losing the company, of becoming her father. Exactly. Richard Drake was weak, once trusted the wrong people, and it killed him. Catherine swore she'd never be vulnerable like that. Never trust anyone. Never show weakness. But fear-based control isn't leadership. It's a prison that eventually collapses. So what do we do? Margaret closed the tablet, met his eyes with the directness of someone who'd spent a career making difficult decisions. We offer her a choice. She laid it out like a chess player explaining endgame strategy. Cooperate fully. Confess to the board. Resign as CEO. Testify against anyone complicit. In exchange, no criminal prosecution. She steps down, assists investigation. Meridian survives under new leadership. Why would she accept? James asked. She threatened to destroy me tonight, because right now she's operating from panic. Tomorrow morning, when she's had time to think, she'll realize she has 2 paths. Margaret counted them on her fingers. Path 1, continue fraud, eventually go to prison like her father almost did. Path 2, confess, get the second chance he never had. Catherine is not stupid. She's scared. I don't think she'll choose prison. But if she does, we give evidence to federal prosecutors. She makes that choice anyway, just without the benefit of cooperation. James looked down at the stack of David's notebooks in his hands. 12 volumes, his father's life-work solutions to problems Ford wouldn't face for a decade, all of it ignored because David Carter didn't have the right credentials. "Why are you helping me?" "You don't owe me anything." Margaret smiled, sad expression that transformed her face. "I owe your father everything. He taught me that redemption is possible if someone's brave enough to offer it. Now it's my turn to pass that forward." "What time are we meeting, Catherine?" 8 a.m. Her office. "I'll text her at 6 to arrange it. She won't refuse because she'll want to control the location." Margaret paused. "And if she brings lawyers, we'll know she's chosen the hard path. But I don't think she will. Catherine is smart enough to recognize when she's out of options." James stood. It was 2:45 a.m. He'd been awake for 21 hours, body exhausted, mind racing. He gathered David's notebooks, held them against his chest like armor. "Thank you for keeping these safe." Margaret walked him to the door. "Your father trusted me with his life's work. I'm glad to finally complete that trust." At the threshold, James paused, looked back at Margaret, silhouetted against the window, Detroit sleeping beneath her. "Do you really think she'll choose redemption?" Margaret's answer came after a heartbeat. "I think she's tired of being afraid. I think she's been waiting 36 years for someone to offer her the choice her father never got." Pause. "Tomorrow morning we find out if I'm right." James rode the elevator down 40 floors, walked out into Detroit winter snow still falling, muffling the world. The city looked almost peaceful under its white blanket. He clutched David's notebooks tighter inside them, his father's voice speaking across decades. "Listen, son, fix what's broken, including people. Make me proud." Tomorrow at 8 a.m. he'd walk into Catherine Drake's office with evidence of fraud and an offer of redemption. Either she'd accept and they'd all have a second chance, or she'd fight and they'd all burn. James looked up at Meridian Engine Works 10 blocks away, 40 floors tall, lit windows like scattered stars. Somewhere in that building, Catherine Drake was awake too, making her own calculations, deciding whether to be her father or become someone he would have been proud of. The snow fell harder. James turned toward the bus stop. In 6 hours, everything would change again. Catherine hadn't slept either. She'd spent the night pacing her penthouse 50 floors above Detroit windows, showing the city waking under fresh snow, everything clean and white and temporary. By noon, the plows would turn it gray. 6 a.m. Her phone buzzed. "Catherine, we need to meet. 8 a.m., your office. Regarding Meridian's future. Dr. Margaret Reynolds. Not regarding the Atlas engine. Not regarding James Carter. Meridian's future." Margaret knew something. Catherine stood at the window evaluating. Option 1, ignore the text. Impossible. Margaret worked for Bobby Sullivan. Ignoring her was ignoring the investor who held Meridian's survival in his hands. Option 2, bring lawyers. But that admitted guilt, showed weakness, revealed she knew she'd done something wrong. Option 3, face Margaret alone. The only real choice. "Ma'am, you haven't slept." Marcus stood in the doorway of her bedroom, retired Marine, 20 years of service, teaching him to recognize when someone was breaking under pressure. "I'm fine, James. You're not. But you're going to that meeting anyway." It wasn't a question. Catherine turned from the window, looked at Marcus, 68 years old, worked for her 15 years, one of 3 people in the world who'd seen her cry. "If I don't come back from that meeting, call my lawyer. Tell him to start damage control." Marcus's expression didn't change. "You'll come back, ma'am. You always do." But his voice carried doubt he couldn't quite hide. Catherine dressed in black Ralph Lauren suit, not the navy one she'd worn yesterday. Black felt more appropriate for what this meeting would be. Funeral clothes, makeup applied carefully, every flaw concealed, hair pulled back severely, armor constructed piece by piece. She stared at herself in the mirror, saw her father's eyes looking back, same shape, same color, same fear poorly hidden. "I won't be weak. I won't end like you." But her hands shook as she fastened her watch. private car through snow-covered streets, Detroit moving slowly, plows working overnight but losing ground to continuous snowfall. Catherine stared out tinted windows past the corner where Drake Manufacturing used to stand. Now it was a storage facility, windowless concrete box holding other people's forgotten things. 36 years since her father died. 36 years of building Meridian to prove she wasn't him. And now it was all coming apart. Meridian Engine Works rose 40 floors into gray sky, Catherine's building, her name on the deed, her father's legacy rebuilt from ashes. She rode the elevator to the 40th floor at 7:55 a.m., walked past empty cubicles too early for most staff workshop where James had fixed the Atlas yesterday, conference room where she'd threatened him, her office door ahead. Through the frosted glass she saw two silhouettes waiting, Margaret Reynolds and James Carter. Catherine's hand trembled on the door handle. She forced it, still took a breath, opened the door. Catherine's office was exactly as she'd left it last night, immaculate, minimalist, every surface chosen for intimidation rather than comfort. Margaret Reynolds sat in the chair across from Catherine's desk, briefcase, open tablet, glowing, professional distance maintained. James Carter stood by the window holding a stack of black notebooks, looking out at Detroit buried under snow. He turned when Catherine entered, their eyes met. Yesterday, she'd threatened his daughter. Today, he held evidence that could destroy her. Catherine moved to her desk, sat in her chair, leather worn smooth by 15 years of command, hands folded on the dark wood surface, spine straight, mask in place. "Dr. Reynolds, Mr. Carter, I assume this isn't a social call." Margaret didn't waste time on pleasantries. "We're here to discuss your options, Catherine. You have two paths forward. I'd like to explain both before you choose." Margaret activated her tablet, turned it so Catherine could see the screen. Financial statements, internal memos, project reports, all annotated with highlights and margin notes tracing patterns of falsification across 18 months. "You've been systematically misrepresenting Meridian's performance since March 2024, hiding project failures, inflating revenue projections, booking future income as current, rushing safety certifications despite unresolved concerns." She swiped through document after document, each one damning, each one irrefutable. Total fraud exposure approximately $45 million across 8 major contracts. Catherine's face remained impassive, but James saw her hands tighten, knuckles pressing white against the dark wood. Catherine stood abruptly, caged animal seeking exit that didn't exist. "Those are internal documents. You had no authorization to access them." Margaret's response was calm, factual. "I'm Bobby Sullivan's technical consultant. He authorized me to review anything necessary for due diligence. What I found was a company built on performance theater rather than engineering reality. The Atlas wasn't an isolated failure. It was a symptom of institutional dishonesty that starts with you." Catherine circled her desk, pacing energy, looking for outlet. "You don't understand. You've never run a company, never dealt with board members who demand impossible results or investors who threaten to pull funding at the first sign of trouble." Her voice rising. "I did what I had to do to survive." James's voice cut through her desperation. Quiet, weighted, carrying truth. Catherine couldn't deflect. "Your father survived his business partner's betrayal until he decided he couldn't." Catherine stopped pacing, turned to face him. "You've been terrified of becoming him your entire adult life. But Catherine, you already have. You're just dying slower." James stepped away from the window, moved closer. Catherine's mask shattered. Tears came suddenly, overwhelming defenses held for 36 years. She sank into her chair, hands covering face, shoulders shaking with sobs, locked in a vault, finally breaking free. "I don't know how to stop." Voice muffled by her hands, raw, broken. "I started with one small adjustment to one report, then another. Then I couldn't stop because admitting I'd lied would mean losing everything." She looked up, makeup running, eyes red, mask gone. "The board would fire me. Investors would sue. My father's company would collapse like his did. I'd be him, weak, dead, forgotten." Margaret's voice softened. Lost prosecutorial edge became something closer to compassion, recognition of shared experience. Your father wasn't weak, Catherine. He was betrayed by people he trusted. That's not weakness. That's tragedy. She leaned forward. And you're not him. You built Meridian from nothing. That took courage and skill and determination. The fraud doesn't erase that. It just means you made choices out of fear instead of strength. Margaret pulled 2 documents from her briefcase, set them side by side on Catherine's desk. Path 1, we give this evidence to federal prosecutors. You're indicted for securities fraud, wire fraud, obstruction. You spend the next 3 years fighting charges you'll probably lose. Meridian collapses during investigation. Your father's legacy dies along with your freedom. She tapped the second document. Path 2, you cooperate fully. Confess everything to the board this morning. Resign as CEO immediately. Provide testimony against any suppliers or contractors who participated in the fraud. In exchange, no criminal prosecution. You step down, assist the investigation. Meridian survives under new leadership. You lose your position, but you keep your freedom and you get a chance to rebuild who you are. Catherine picked up the cooperation agreement, hands shaking, paper trembling. Why would you offer this? After everything I've done, after I threatened Mr. Carter's daughter last night. Why? James set David's notebooks on her desk, 12 volumes of ignored genius. Because my wife taught me that mistakes don't define people. How they respond to mistakes does. He met Catherine's eyes. You can spend the rest of your life running from your father's shadow, or you can face it and discover you're stronger than he was. But that only works if you choose it. Catherine looked at the cooperation agreement, read through clauses detailing confession, resignation, testimony, looked at her father's photograph on the credenza, Richard's smiling arm around teenage Catherine before partners betrayed him, before suicide note, before 16-year-old found him hanging in his office. What would he want? Catherine picked up her pen. Hand steadying, signed the cooperation agreement, single signature, ending one life, beginning another. She looked up at Margaret and James. What happens now? Margaret checked her watch. Board meeting, 9 a.m. You tell them everything. Then you step down. Catherine nodded, wiped her eyes, began reconstructing her mask, but this time there was something different underneath. Not armor, acceptance. 7 board members sat around the glass table at 9 a.m., exactly collectively owned 43% of Meridian's stock, enough voting power to remove Catherine with consensus. Bobby Sullivan occupied the head of the table, investor's prerogative. His 3 aides flanked him, tablets open, recording everything. Dr. Margaret Reynolds sat at Sullivan's right, interim CEO candidate, the plan already in motion. James Carter stood near the back wall, observer, witness, the janitor who'd started this avalanche. Derek Mitchell and Ashley Parker represented the engineering staff. 28 other engineers waited outside their jobs, depending on how the next hour unfolded. Catherine entered at 9, exactly walked through the door like someone walking to execution. Black suit, hair pulled back, makeup repaired, but eyes still red from crying. She carried no briefcase, no tablet, no armor except truth. She stood at the head of the table, same position she'd commanded from for 15 years. But her posture was different now, not defeated, more like someone who'd been carrying impossible weight and finally set it down. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming on short notice. Her voice steady despite the fear threatening to crack through. I called this emergency meeting to make an announcement. Effective immediately, I'm resigning as CEO of Meridian Engine Works. The board exploded in shocked murmurs. Thomas Brennan, silver-haired 68, Catherine's primary enemy, stood halfway up, then sat down again. Bobby Sullivan leaned forward, blue eyes fixed on Catherine with the intensity of someone calculating cost of failure. Catherine raised her hand for silence, waited until whispers died. I'm resigning because I've been falsifying company reports for 18 months. Hiding project failures, inflating revenue projections, misrepresenting safety certifications, booking future income as current revenue. Total fraud exposure is approximately $45 million across 8 major contracts. The murmurs became shouts. Board members grabbed phones, calling lawyers, calculating losses, protecting themselves. Derek stared at his hands. He'd signed some of those reports, trusted Catherine's numbers. Ashley pulled out her tablet, started pulling up project files. How much of the work she'd done was built on fraudulent foundations? Thomas Brennan pointed at Catherine like she was a war criminal, voice sharp with fury. "You've destroyed this company, destroyed shareholder value, our reputations. You should be in prison." Catherine didn't flinch, didn't defend, just waited for him to finish. "Perhaps, Mr. Brennan, but prison doesn't help Meridian survive. Cooperation does." She gestured to Margaret. "Dr. Reynolds has compiled complete documentation of the fraud. I'm cooperating fully with her investigation. I've agreed to testify against anyone, complicit suppliers, contractors, any board members who knew and didn't act." Her eyes scanned the table. Several members shifted uncomfortably. "In exchange, federal prosecutors won't pursue criminal charges against me. Meridian can survive this if we act transparently and commit to fundamental change." Margaret activated the conference room display, organizational charts, financial projections, plans for unwinding fraud and rebuilding Meridian around transparency. "The engineering work at Meridian is fundamentally sound. The designs are good. The innovation is real. The problem was management, not capability." She pulled up corrected financial statements, real numbers. "With proper leadership and honest reporting, this company can recover and thrive. We'll need 18 months of restructuring, full independent audit, revised contracts with clients. But Meridian's core technology, especially after yesterday's Atlas success, is valuable." Bobby Sullivan stood 6'2" of Texas oil money and hard-earned wisdom. Who would lead that recovery? His drawl made the question sound simple, but it carried weight. Everyone here either knew about the fraud and did nothing or was incompetent enough not to notice. "Either way, why should I trust any of you?" Margaret gestured toward James. "Because you already saw the solution yesterday, Bobby." James Carter identified and fixed a problem your $1 million team couldn't solve in 8 weeks. He did it with $78 and the willingness to listen. That's the kind of leadership Meridian needs. 7 board members stared at James, the janitor, the maintenance worker, the man with no degree, no credentials, no business standing in this room. Thomas Brennan objected immediately. "With respect, Dr. Reynolds, Mr. Carter has no management experience, no engineering degree, no credentials beyond high school. How can he possibly run a technical organization?" Margaret's response was measured. "The same way he fixed your unfixable engine, Mr. Brennan. By listening. By caring about truth more than ego. By having the humility to learn rather than arrogance to assume he knows everything." James stepped forward, felt the weight of attention, 200 pounds of expectation pressing on shoulders that had carried nothing heavier than a mop for 3 years. Every eye tracking his movement. He pulled out his worn notebook, set it on the conference table. "Dr. Reynolds is correct that I lack credentials. I don't have an MBA. I never finished my engineering degree. I learned everything I know in my father's garage and in the shop I ran before medical bills forced me to sell it." He paused, met each board member's eyes in turn. "But I learned something yesterday that credentials can't teach. Meridian doesn't need more people who know how to talk about engineering. It needs people who know how to do it." He opened the notebook, showed 2 weeks of observations. "For 3 years, I've been watching this company. Watching projects fail because communication broke down between design and implementation. Watching talented people get ignored because they didn't have the right degrees or titles. Watching executives prioritize appearance over function." He closed the notebook, set it down with finality. "I can't promise I'll be a perfect leader, but I promise I'll listen to people doing actual work, and I'll fix what's broken instead of hiding it." Bobby Sullivan walked around the table, stood directly in front of James, close enough James could smell coffee on his breath. Texas drawl, worn smooth but still carrying Pecos underneath. "Mr. Carter, if I invest another $20 million to keep Meridian operational during restructuring, can you deliver projects on time and on budget?" James met his gaze, didn't look away. "I'll deliver more than that, Mr. Sullivan. I'll build a culture where talent is recognized regardless of background, where problems get solved instead of buried, where we measure success by what we actually accomplish, not what we claim we accomplished. Sullivan studied James for a long moment, then nodded. I vote yes. James Carter becomes Chief Technical Officer. Dr. Reynolds becomes Interim CEO for 12 months. We restructure Meridian around honesty instead of fraud. He looked around the table. Anyone who disagrees can sell me their shares at yesterday's closing price. Silence. Then one by one hands raised, 6-1 in favor. Thomas Brennan's sole dissent noted ignored. Just like that, James Carter transformed from janitor to executive, from invisible to undeniable, from someone the system discarded to someone the system needed to survive. Board members scattered like shrapnel after the vote, calling lawyers, calculating losses, protecting themselves. Some glanced at Catherine with fury, others with something like pity. Derek approached James hesitantly. Mr. Carter, sir, I was wrong about you. I'd like to stay. Learn how you do what you do. James extended his hand. Call me James. And yes, I'll need engineers who can admit mistakes. That's where real learning starts. Ashley stood behind Derek. Does that include junior engineers who should have caught the conversion error 8 weeks ago? James smiled. Especially those. You found it yesterday. That's what matters. Catherine approached James alone. Board members avoided her now toxic asset legal liability. Former queen without kingdom. She extended her hand formally. Thank you for not destroying me when you had every reason to. James shook her hand, felt the tremor she couldn't suppress. Thank you for being brave enough to tell the truth. That's harder than lying, especially when you've been lying to protect yourself for so long. What will you do now? James looked around the conference room. His conference room now, somehow. Try to be the leader my father taught me to be. Someone who listens. Who fixes what's broken. Small smile crossed Catherine's face. First genuine one in years. And what will I do? She looked out the window at Detroit buried under snow. Learn to be someone I'm not ashamed to see in the mirror. Maybe that's enough. Catherine walked out of the conference room, out of Meridian Engine Works for the last time as CEO, carrying nothing except knowledge. She'd finally made a choice her father would have been proud of if he'd lived long enough to make it himself. James watched her disappear down the corridor. Woman who tried to destroy him yesterday chose redemption today. Sometimes the bravest thing was admitting you were wrong. The workshop occupied the 40th floor's northwest corner, climate-controlled precision glass walls on 3 sides, 6 HD cameras in the corners now dormant. It was 8:15 p.m. building, mostly empty skeleton crew on night shift security making rounds every hour. James had told Margaret he was working late on Atlas improvements, partly true. Mostly he needed to be here. The Atlas PM7500 sat on its test stand, not running, just present. 7 feet of American engineering that had changed his life. James approached it slowly, placed both hands on the block metal, cool to touch, inert, waiting. He closed his eyes, listened. Not to mechanical systems this time. To memory. An engine has a heart, son. You listen with your ears, your mind, and your soul. Summer afternoon, 1983. James, 13 years old, learning to diagnose Plymouth's troubles by feeling rather than measuring. The engine speaks truth. Machines don't lie. Sometimes people lie about what machines tell them, but the machine itself always honest. James had carried that teaching for 42 years, through David's death, through building Carter's auto repair, through Rebecca's illness, through bankruptcy, through 3 years of invisibility, until 2 weeks ago, when that teaching saved Meridian Engine Works, saved Catherine Drake, saved himself. He'd brought David's notebooks with him tonight, 12 volumes spread across the workbench, each one documenting solutions Ford ignored. James had given them to Margaret last week. Digitize these. Put them in Meridian's engineering library. Make sure his name is on every page. Margaret had agreed immediately. By January, David Carter's innovations would be required reading for every Meridian engineer. The ghost Ford dismissed would finally get recognition. James pulled out his worn notebook, the one he'd kept for 3 years, observations, calculations, 2 weeks of watching the Atlas fail. Opened to a fresh page, wrote in the same cramped handwriting his father had used. December 10, 2025. Atlas PM 7500 hour 572. Running perfectly. Temperature optimal. Pressure stable. No errors. Then added, Dad, I kept my promise. I listened. I fixed what was broken. And I made you proud. He set down the pencil, placed both hands on the engine. One last time felt the cold metal, imagined David's hands beside his. 3 generations of Carters who'd learned to speak the language engines taught. Security camera in the corner recorded it all. James silhouetted against the workshop window. Detroit skyline behind him, lights glowing in darkness. City that died and refused to stay buried. Man who did the same. Engine singing a song only he could hear. Margaret found him 20 minutes later, brought coffee, sat beside him in comfortable silence. 2 people who'd been broken, been saved by David Carter's kindness, now passing that forward. Emma called the next morning, told him she got the permanent position at Children's Hospital. Rebecca's dream for her daughter fulfilled. Catherine texted next week, simple message, thank you, nothing more needed. But tonight, James sat with his father's ghost and his father's engine and his father's notebooks. And for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't invisible. He wasn't alone. He was exactly where he belonged. James closed the notebook, pressed his palm to the engine one last time, whispered into the empty workshop. I'm home, Dad. I finally found my way back. Outside the window, snow began to fall again. Detroit preparing for another winter, another cycle of death and resurrection. But James Carter, 55 years old, chief technical officer, keeper of his father's legacy, wasn't afraid of winter anymore. He'd learned that engines had hearts, and hearts could be healed. 2 weeks later, December 15, 2025. James's new office occupied the 35th floor, not the penthouse. He'd refused that. Corner space felt right close to the workshop, close to the engineering staff, high enough to see Detroit, but not so high he forgot where he came from. Window overlooking the city. Desk with laptop and engineering references. David's red toolbox sat on the credenza beside family photos, Rebecca at their wedding. Emma in her nursing scrubs. David in the Ford plant. Nameplate on the door. James Carter, Chief Technical Officer. Every time he saw it, part of him expected to wake up in his studio apartment mopping floors. James had instituted listening sessions every Friday afternoon. Any employee janitor to senior engineer could present ideas. No credentials required, only competence. Result 3, previously ignored suggestions already implemented, including one from a maintenance worker named Carlos, who'd noticed the HVAC system wasting energy by running full blast in empty sections. Simple fix saved Meridian $4,000 monthly. Carlos got a bonus and promotion to facilities management. Margaret, now interim CEO, had overhauled all project timelines, real deadlines, not aspirational ones. Real budgets, not fantasy projections. Board initially resisted, wanted optimistic numbers for investor presentations. Bobby Sullivan shut that down. I'd rather know truth and plan around it than be surprised by lies later. The Atlas now ran 247 hours without shutdown. First production units, shipping to Navy contractors next week. Marine industry publications running features, Meridian Engine Works comeback, and the Janitor who saved a company. James hated the headlines, but the work spoke for itself. Derek Mitchell demoted to senior engineer, not lead. He'd taken it without resigning, knew he'd failed, wanted to rebuild. Ashley Parker promoted to lead engineer, 25 years old, youngest person in that role in Meridian's history. James's reasoning: she has the humility Derek lacked, and humility matters more than years of experience. Thomas Brennan, still on the board but marginalized, voted against every proposal, but 6 votes beat 1 every time. James still arrived at 7 a.m., old habit from maintenance days. No longer cleaning, but sometimes picked up a mop to help facilities crew. didn't want to forget. He'd moved to a two-bedroom apartment in Dearborn, $1,400 a month. Not luxury, but had a kitchen with 4 working burners and shower with good water pressure. Small victories. Emma had driven from Pittsburgh that evening, surprised James by showing up at Meridian at 5 p.m., watching him work through the glass partition, seeing her father command respect from engineers who'd dismissed him 2 weeks ago. Now they sat at James's new dining table, actual table, not card table. 4 chairs, not 2. Eating spaghetti with meat sauce from Rebecca's recipe. "This apartment is so much better, Dad." James smiled. 2 bedrooms means you can visit without sleeping on the couch. I wasn't complaining about the couch. I was worried about you in that studio. It felt like you were disappearing. I was. For 3 years I was disappearing. Then something happened that forced me to be visible again. He told her everything. Catherine's threat, Margaret's intervention, David's notebooks, the mercy, lie about his father's death, the board meeting the choice between invisibility and impact. Emma listened without interrupting. When he finished, she reached across the table and took his hand. Grandpa would be so proud. James's eyes welled. I hope so. I got the pediatric rotation I wanted. Starts January at Children's Hospital. Full-time position after graduation if I do well. James squeezed her hand. Your mother would be so proud. They sat quietly for a moment. Rebecca's absence still present at the table, always would be, but not crushing anymore. Just there. Part of who they were. After dinner, Emma pulled a small wrapped box from her bag. Found this at an estate sale in Pittsburgh. Thought you'd want it. James unwrapped carefully. Inside vintage Ford Motor Company lapel pin, same kind David had worn every day. James's hands trembled slightly as he pinned it to his flannel shirt over his heart. Thank you, sweetheart. Couch watching snowfall outside the window. Detroit at night, beautiful despite its scars, or maybe because of them. James's phone buzzed. Text from Margaret. Board approved your budget for new hires. You're building something real, James. He showed Emma the text. She squeezed his hand. Grandpa would be proud. Mom, too. James looked at the Ford pin on his chest, felt its weight, legacy and responsibility and hope, all compressed into small piece of metal. Yeah, I think they would be. Same evening, 7:30 p.m. Catherine's apartment occupied a building in Dearborn, same neighborhood as James's old studio. No penthouse. 1-bedroom space, $950 a month, furnished simply from IKEA, no designer, no champagne with shopping. Couch, bed, table, chairs. Functional. Honest. But it was hers, earned through honesty. After her resignation, Catherine spent 2 weeks testifying. Cooperation agreement meant detailed statements to prosecutors, helped identify fraud participants. 4 suppliers indicted, 2 board members under investigation. Her testimony crucial. Without it, the case would have been weaker. Now she taught business ethics at Wayne State University, adjunct professor, $45,000 a year. Irony not lost on her, woman who committed fraud, teaching how not to. But students respected her because she was honest about failures. I'm not here to tell you how to succeed. I'm here to show you how not to fail the way I did. Weekly sessions with Dr. Patricia Morgan, trauma specialist, finally addressing PTSD from father's suicide. 36 years of carrying that image, Richard hanging in his office, 16-year-old Catherine, finding him trying to cut him down too late. Learning now that she didn't have to carry it alone anymore. Catherine sat at her small kitchen table that evening, laptop open, grading student papers on business ethics. One paper made her pause. Topic: When does self-preservation become self-destruction? Student's thesis. Sometimes the bravest thing a leader can do is admit they were wrong and step down. Not because they're weak, but because they're strong enough to face truth. Catherine wrote in the margin, "Yes, exactly. This is the lesson I learned too late, but not too late to pass on. A+ work." Her phone rang. Margaret Reynolds. "How are you doing?" Catherine smiled, genuine expression that felt foreign on her face. "Better. Smaller life, but it's mine. How's Meridian thriving?" "James is doing remarkable work. You'd be proud." Catherine looked out her window at Detroit, same city, different perspective. "I am proud. Tell him thank you for giving me the chance my father never had." The workshop was quiet at 8:45 p.m., building mostly empty. James had one more thing to do before going home. He approached the Atlas, placed both hands on its block metal, warm now from running all-day vibrations of controlled combustion traveling through steel into bone. The heartbeat that had found its rhythm. A machine speaks truth to anyone willing to listen. It doesn't care about your credentials, your mistakes, or where you came from. It only cares if you understand its language. James thought about Rebecca in the hospice bed, hand-thin as paper, voice reduced to breath. "Promise me you'll find your way back." He'd kept that promise, found his way from invisibility to impact, from silence to voice that mattered. He thought about David in the garage teaching a 13-year-old boy to hear what others couldn't. An engine has a heart, son. That teaching had traveled across decades, survived death and loss and bankruptcy, emerged in a workshop 40 floors above Detroit, where it saved a company, saved a woman, saved a man. James whispered into the empty space, "I made you proud, Dad. Both of you. I finally made you proud." Outside the window, snow continued falling. Detroit winter wrapping the city in white silence. But inside the workshop, the Atlas hummed its perfect rhythm, proof that broken things could be healed, that listening mattered more than credentials, that redemption was possible for anyone brave enough to choose it. James Carter, 55 years old, no longer invisible, no longer silent, stood in the place his father's wisdom had built and understood finally what it meant to come home.